The crossing captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the U.S. Horizon and watched the view screen display the invisible line that separated human territory from the Krell Dominion. The war had been grinding on for 2 years now, and humanity was losing ground every single day. The Krell had superior numbers, and their technology had proven effective against every defense humanity could mount. Thousands of colonies had fallen and millions of people had died, and Earth's military command was running out of options fast. That was why Elena and her ship were here at this moment, preparing to do something that everyone back home considered complete madness. The Horizon was humanity's newest warship, and it carried experimental technology that had never been tested in actual combat conditions. The ship's designers had built systems based on entirely new principles of physics and engineering, and nobody knew for certain if any of it would actually work when the shooting started. But Earth needed a miracle right now, and this mission was humanity's best chance at creating one. Elena had volunteered for this assignment, knowing full well that she would probably die out here in the darkness between stars. But if her death could buy humanity some breathing room, then it would be worth it. Lieutenant Marcus Chun sat at the navigation console, and his hands moved across the holographic controls with practiced precision. He had been Elena's navigator for 5 years now, and they had been through more close calls than either of them cared to remember. He looked up at his captain and asked if they were really going through with this plan, and Elena nodded once and said they were committed now, and there was no turning back. Marcus took a deep breath and entered the final course corrections. That would take them across the border and into Krell space. The Krell Dominion had ruled their section of the galaxy for over 2,000 years, and they had conquered 12 different species during that time. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and numerical superiority, and they had never encountered an enemy they could not eventually crush through sheer numbers. They viewed humanity as just another weak species that would be absorbed into their empire within a few more years of fighting. But the Krell had made one critical error in their calculations, and that error was underestimating what humans could accomplish when their survival was threatened. Down in the engineering section of the Horizon, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim was monitoring all the ship's experimental systems with intense focus. Sarah had spent the last 3 years of her life developing the adaptive shield technology that the Horizon now carried, and everything depended on whether her theories would actually work in practice. The shields used quantum field manipulation to create a defensive barrier that could adjust its properties in real time based on incoming threats. In simulations, the technology had performed beyond expectations, but Sarah knew that reality was always more complicated than any simulation could predict. Horizon crossed the border into Krell territory, and for exactly 8 minutes nothing happened at all. The ship glided silently through space, and some of the crew began to hope that maybe they had gotten lucky, and maybe the Krell sensors had not detected their incursion yet. But then every alarm on the ship started screaming simultaneously, and Tactical Officer Lieutenant James Park shouted that they had multiple contacts incoming fast. He reported that 42 Krell warships were converging on their position from 3 different directions, and they were also launching fighter craft by the hundreds. Elena allowed herself a thin smile, because this was exactly what she had expected. The Krell always responded to threats with massive force, because that was the only way they knew how to fight. They believed that any problem could be solved by throwing enough ships at it until the enemy was overwhelmed and destroyed. And they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about human adaptability and human innovation. Elena ordered the helmsman to adjust their heading to face the largest concentration of enemy ships, and she told James to prepare all weapon systems and make ready to engage. Commander Thaxron commanded. the Krell forces from his flagship called the Endless Victory, and he looked at his tactical display showing the single human vessel surrounded by his fleet. He felt nothing but contempt for these aliens who had dared to violate Dominion space with just one ship. Thaxron had fought in dozens of campaigns over his long military career, and he had never seen such foolishness from any species. He gave orders for all ships to move into attack formation, and he wanted this human vessel destroyed quickly and completely as a warning to the rest of their pathetic civilization, not the 300 Krell fighter. Craft formed up into tight attack formations and began their approach toward the horizon with weapons armed and targeting systems locked. The pilots were confident because they had overwhelming numerical advantage and because they had done this exact same maneuver against dozens of other species over the years. None of them felt any doubt about how this engagement would end. They closed to weapons range and opened fire with their plasma cannons, and thousands of bright orange energy bolts streaked through space toward the human warship. On the bridge of the horizon, Elena sat perfectly still in her command chair and watched the enemy fire approaching on the tactical display. Beside her, Marcus Chun was gripping his console tightly, and his face showed the fear that everyone on the bridge was feeling at that moment. But Elena's voice was calm and steady when she spoke, and she told everyone to trust the technology and trust the plan. She opened a channel to engineering and asked Sarah Kim if the adaptive shields were ready, and Sarah reported that all systems were functioning perfectly, and they were about to find out if 3 years of research and development had been worth it. The plasma bolts reached the horizon and struck the adaptive shields, and something remarkable happened. The shields did not simply absorb or deflect the energy like conventional defensive systems would have done. Instead, the shields analyzed the frequency and power characteristics of each incoming shot and adjusted their quantum field properties to create the exact opposite resonance pattern. The result was that the plasma bolts lost coherence the instant they touched the shields, and their energy dissipated harmlessly into space. Not a single shot penetrated through to the hull. The Krell pilots could not understand what they were seeing because their targeting computers told them that every shot had hit the target perfectly. But the human ship showed absolutely no damage, and its shields did not even flicker or fade from the impacts. The pilots attacked again, and then a third time, and the result was exactly the same. Thousands of plasma bolts simply vanished when they struck the horizon's shields, and the human vessel continued moving through space as if nothing was happening at all. Commander Thaxron watched this impossible scene unfold on his display screens and demanded to know what was interfering with his fighters' weapons. His tactical officer explained that the sensors showed every shot hitting the target, but somehow the human shields were neutralizing the plasma energy before it could cause any damage. Thaxron's face darkened with anger, and he ordered all 42 warships to open fire simultaneously, and he said to saturate the entire area with so much firepower that no shield system in existence could possibly withstand it. The Krell fleet unleashed everything they had, and space itself seemed to catch fire from the sheer volume of energy weapons being fired. Tens of thousands of plasma bolts converged on the horizon's position, and the combined firepower was enough to vaporize a small moon. The barrage continued for 90 full seconds, and when it finally stopped, the Krell crews waited to see the debris field that should be all that remained of the human ship. But the horizon was still there, and its hull was completely undamaged, and not even a single scorch mark marred its surface. Elena Vasquez stood up from her command chair and straightened her uniform, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the bridge with absolute authority. She said it was time to show the Krell what humanity had learned about warfare, and she ordered James Park to lock weapons on the Krell flagship and prepare to fire the main railgun. James worked quickly and reported that targeting was locked and the weapon was charged and ready. Elena gave the order to fire, and the Horizon's experimental mass driver began its acceleration sequence. The railgun was based on magnetic acceleration technology that humanity had been developing for decades, but had only recently perfected for military applications. The weapon accelerated a solid tungsten projectile to 70% of light speed using a series of superconducting magnetic coils that ran the entire length of the ship's forward section. The projectile left the railgun and crossed the distance to the Endless Victory in less than 2 seconds. The Krell flagship's shields were designed to stop energy weapons, and they were completely useless against a physical object moving at relativistic velocity. The tungsten projectile punched through the shields like they were tissue paper and struck the flagship's hull with kinetic energy equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. The impact created a massive explosion that tore the ship apart from the inside out, and secondary detonations rippled through the wreckage as the reactor lost containment. Commander Thaxron and his entire crew of 4,000 died instantly, and the Endless Victory ceased to exist as anything except expanding clouds of superheated gas and metal fragments. The remaining 41 Krell warships broke formation immediately and scattered in complete panic. The Krell commanders had never seen anything like this in all their centuries of warfare. Their shields had always protected them, and their numerical superiority had always guaranteed victory. But now they were facing an enemy they could not hurt, and who could kill them with a single shot. The acting fleet commander began broadcasting emergency retreat orders and telling all ships to activate their junk drives and escape from this system as fast as possible. Elena watched the enemy fleet falling apart on her tactical display, and she knew that fear was spreading through their ranks like poison. That was exactly what humanity needed, because a terrified enemy would spread stories, and those stories would reach every corner of the Krell Dominion. Elena ordered communications to open a channel to all Krell vessels on every frequency. When the channel was open, she spoke clearly and deliberately, and she wanted every word to be recorded and remembered. She said that she was Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earthship Horizon, and she had a message for the Krell Dominion. She said that for 2 years, the Krell had been attacking human colonies and killing human civilians and pushing humanity back across hundreds of star systems. The Krell had thought that humans were weak and would eventually surrender. But the Krell had been wrong about humanity, and this attack was not a desperate last stand, but was instead a promise of what was coming. The railgun fired again, and another Krell battleship exploded into fragments. Elena continued speaking, and she said that humanity did not surrender and did not forget, and most importantly, humanity did not forgive those who murdered their people. She said that every Krell ship that had participated in attacks on human colonies would be hunted down and destroyed. She said that every Krell world that had celebrated human deaths would learn what it meant to face human vengeance. And she said that the Krell Dominion had one chance to end this war, and that chance was to withdraw from all occupied human territory. Immediately and completely, James Park reported that 18 Krell ships had successfully jumped away and escaped, but 23 ships remained in the system, still trying to charge their jump drives. Elena told him to target those ships, one by one, starting with the closest. The Horizon moved through the battlefield methodically, and its railgun spoke again and again. Each shot found its target with perfect accuracy, and each target was destroyed instantly. The Krell ships that had been designed for traditional space combat had no defense against projectiles, moving at significant fractions of light speed. After 30 minutes, only wreckage remained in the system. 23 Krell warships had been reduced to expanding debris fields, and 18 more had fled in terror, back to Dominion space. The Horizon had not suffered even minor damage, despite facing odds of more than 40 to 1. Elena ordered her crew to begin scanning the wreckage for intelligence data and to prepare a full report for Earth Command. She knew that this battle was just the beginning and that the real war was about to start now that humanity had shown the Krell that they could be beaten down in engineering. Sarah Kim was staring at her computer screens with tears of relief running down her face. Her adaptive shield technology had worked perfectly and had saved all their lives. She had proven that human innovation could overcome superior enemy numbers, and now that technology would be installed on every warship in Earth's fleet. Marcus Chun turned to look at Elena and said they had just made history and changed the entire course of the war. Elena nodded slowly and said they had given humanity hope, and now they needed to make sure that hope became reality, through victory after victory, until the Krell learned to fear the name of Earth itself. Asterisk. The message the Emergency Council Chamber on Krell Prime was filled with military commanders and government officials, and the atmosphere was thick with tension and disbelief. Supreme Commander Thaxron was dead along with 4,000 of his crew, and 23 warships had been destroyed by a single human vessel. The news had spread across the Dominion like wildfire, and every military installation was demanding answers about how this could have happened. High Chancellor Vexter stood at the head of the massive circular table, and his clawed hands gripped the edge as he listened to the reports coming in from the border regions. Admiral Krivan was the ranking military officer present, and he had commanded fleets for 30 years, across multiple campaigns against various species. He explained to the assembled leaders that the human ship possessed 2 revolutionary technologies that the Krell had never encountered before. The first was a shield system that somehow neutralized plasma weapons completely, and the second was a kinetic weapon that fired solid projectiles at speeds approaching light velocity. Their conventional shields offered no protection against such weapons, and their numerical advantage meant nothing if they could not damage the enemy. High Chancellor Vexter demanded to know how many of these ships the humans possessed, and Admiral Krivan admitted they had no reliable intelligence on that question. The 18 ships that escaped from the battle reported seeing only 1 human vessel, but that did not mean others did not exist. For all they knew, humanity might have dozens or even hundreds of these warships already deployed. The Chancellor slammed his fist on the table and said this was unacceptable, and they needed information immediately, before making any military decisions. General Zarthok, who commanded the Dominion's ground forces, spoke up and suggested that perhaps they should consider the human ultimatum seriously. The human captain had demanded complete withdrawal from all occupied territory and had promised continued attacks if that demand was not met. Zarthok pointed out that the Dominion had already lost over 5,000 soldiers in a single engagement, and if the humans could repeat that performance, then continuing the war might be suicide. Several other officers nodded in agreement, but many more looked outraged at the suggestion of surrender. Admiral Krivan stood and said that retreat was not an option, and them all Dominion had never surrendered to any species in 2,000 years of expansion. He proposed assembling the largest fleet in Krell history and sending it to human space to crush this threat once and for all. He said they should gather every available warship from across the entire Dominion and create an armada so massive that even this new human technology could not stand against it. Numbers had always been the Krell's greatest strength, and he believed that strength would prevail again if they committed enough resources. Asterisk. The debate continued for hours as different factions argued for different courses of action. Some wanted immediate retaliation while others counseled caution and reconnaissance. Eventually, High Chancellor Vexter made his decision and ordered Admiral Krevon to assemble a fleet of 300 warships from the 2nd and 4th battle groups. This fleet would be sent to the human border with orders to destroy any human vessel that crossed into Dominion space, but not to initiate offensive operations until they had better intelligence about human capabilities. It was a compromise position that satisfied nobody completely but prevented open conflict within the Council. Meanwhile, on the horizon, Captain Elena Vasquez was conducting a secure communication with Admiral Marcus Webb, who commanded Earth's 3rd Fleet from his flagship. Orbiting Mars, the Admiral's weathered face showed a mixture of pride and concern as he listened to Elena's full report about the engagement. He congratulated her on an impossible victory, but warned that the Krell would respond with overwhelming force once they recovered from their shock. Elena agreed and said that was exactly what humanity needed to happen, because fear only worked if it was reinforced with repeated demonstrations of strength. Admiral Webb explained that 3 more ships with adaptive shield technology were being rushed through final testing and would be combat-ready within 6 weeks. 2 of those ships would join the horizon to form a small task force, while the 3rd would remain near Earth as a last line of defense. In addition, the shipyards at Luna and Europa were beginning production of railgun-equipped vessels, but those would take months to complete. Elena asked what the strategic plan was for the coming weeks, and Webb said they needed to keep the Krell off balance and uncertain about human strength until reinforcements arrived. Dr. Sarah Kim appeared on a secondary screen during the communication and reported that she had been analyzing the wreckage from the destroyed Krell ships. She had discovered something interesting about their reactor technology that might give humanity another advantage. The Krell power systems used a cascade fusion process that was actually less efficient than Earth's newer antimatter reactors. This meant that human ships could potentially outrun Krell vessels in sustained flight and could also maintain higher power output for weapons and shields over longer periods. It was not a decisive advantage, but every edge mattered in war. Lieutenant James Park was reviewing tactical data with his analysis team, and he noticed a pattern in how the Krell ships had been positioned during the battle. The Krell formations were designed for mutual support with overlapping fields of fire, but that doctrine assumed all ships could contribute to defense. With the adaptive shields making Krell weapons useless, those tight formations became a liability instead of an asset. James prepared a report suggesting that future engagements should exploit this weakness by forcing Krell ships into clustered formations and then using the railgun's kinetic energy to create shrapnel that would damage multiple vessels at once. Elena read James's report and immediately saw the potential. She contacted Dr. Kim and asked if the railgun projectiles could be modified to fragment on impact rather than penetrating clean through. Sarah thought about it for a moment and said they could add scoring patterns to the tungsten penetrators that would cause them to break apart after initial impact. The fragments would still be traveling at enormous velocity and would tear through any nearby ships like a shotgun blast. Elena approved the modification and told Sarah to prepare several dozen fragmentation rounds for the next engagement. Word of the Horizon's victory spread through human space faster than any official announcement could have managed. Colonies that had been preparing for evacuation suddenly had hope again. Military recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers who wanted to serve on the new warships. The Council of Earth received thousands of messages from citizens demanding that the war be taken directly to Krell territory. Elena watched news footage of celebrations in the streets of New Tokyo and New Paris, and she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Shoulders because she knew that one victory did not win. War, the Krell reconnaissance. Drones began appearing in human space 3 days after the battle, and they were scanning everything they could find about human military installations and ship movements. Earth's intelligence services detected the drones immediately, and Admiral Webb made the decision to allow them to gather specific information while blocking access to classified facilities. The drones were permitted to observe the shipyards and count the vessels under construction, but were prevented from scanning the research stations where new weapons were being developed. Webb wanted the Krell to see enough to make them cautious, but not enough to reveal humanity's true capabilities. Admiral Krevan studied the reconnaissance data from his command center on Krell Prime, and what he saw disturbed him greatly. The humans had at least 15 large shipyards operating at full capacity, and new warships were being constructed at an alarming rate. He could identify 12 vessels that appeared similar in design to the Horizon, and he had no way of knowing which, if any, were equipped with the new shield and weapon technology. The humans were clearly preparing for a major offensive campaign, and the Dominion needed to act quickly before that offensive could be launched. The Krell Second Battle Group assembled at the border staging area, and 300 warships took up defensive positions across a dozen star systems. Admiral Krevan commanded this fleet personally from his new flagship called the Eternal Dominion. He distributed his forces carefully to avoid the kind of concentrated formation that had proven vulnerable in the previous battle. He also ordered all ships to maintain maximum separation of at least 500 kilometers, so that a single kinetic strike could not damage multiple vessels. It was a sound tactical adjustment based on the lessons learned from Commander Thaxron's defeat. Captain Elena Vasquez received her new orders from Admiral Webb, and she read them twice to make sure she understood correctly. Earth Command wanted the Horizon to cross the border again and engage the Krell fleet that was massing at the staging area. But this time, Elena would not be alone, because 2 other ships would be joining her. The U's Valiant and the UES Resolute had completed their final testing ahead of schedule, and both carried the same adaptive shield and railgun technology as the Horizon. Together, the 3 ships would form humanity's first strike group, and their mission was to break the Krell fleet and open a corridor for future operations. Elena met with the captains of the Valiant and Resolute via holographic conference to coordinate their attack plan. Captain David Shun of the Valiant was a veteran officer with a reputation for aggressive tactics and creative thinking. Captain Lisa Torres of the Resolute was younger, but had distinguished herself during the early months of the war through her skill at defensive operations. Together, the 3 captains developed a strategy that would maximize their technological advantages while minimizing their exposure to the Krell's numerical superiority. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The 3 human ships would enter Krell space separately at different locations and force the enemy fleet to divide their attention. Each ship would engage Krell forces independently and draw them into pursuit. Then, at a predetermined moment, all 3 ships would converge on a single location and concentrate their firepower on whatever Krell forces were present. The fragmentation rounds would turn each railgun shot into a cluster weapon that could damage dozens of ships, and the adaptive shields would protect the human vessels from any counterattack. Elena reviewed the plan one final time and then gave the order to begin the operation. The Horizon jumped to hyperspace and headed toward the border, while the Valiant and Resolute took different routes to their assigned entry points. The 3 ships would arrive in Krell space within minutes of each other, and then the real battle would begin. Elena sat in her command chair and thought about all the people depending on this mission's success. Billions of humans across hundreds of colonies were watching and waiting to see if humanity could truly stand against the Krell. Dominion. The horizon dropped out of hyperspace, deep inside Krell territory, and immediately began broadcasting its identification on all frequencies. Elena wanted the Krell to know exactly who had arrived, and she wanted them to respond with everything they had. Within seconds, the tactical display lit up with enemy contacts as Krell warships detected the intrusion and began converging on the horizon's position. Marcus Chun counted 42 vessels inbound and said they would be in weapons range within 3 minutes. Elena ordered the ship to begin evasive maneuvers and told James Park to wait for her command before opening fire, 50 light years away. Captain David Chun brought the Valiant across the border and immediately encountered a Krell patrol group of 18 ships. He ordered his crew to engage with railgun fire, and the first shot destroyed a Krell cruiser with a devastating kinetic impact. The remaining 17 ships turned to pursue the Valiant, and David led them on a winding course through the system while transmitting taunts and challenges on all Krell frequencies. He wanted them angry and focused entirely on his ship so they would follow him to the convergence point. Captain Lisa Torres and the Resolute emerged from hyperspace near a Krell supply depot and found themselves facing 31 warships that were guarding the facility. Lisa immediately fired on the depot itself, and her railgun round tore through the massive structure and triggered secondary explosions that destroyed half the facility. The Krell ships abandoned their defensive positions and charged after the Resolute in fury. Lisa smiled grimly and set course for the rendezvous coordinates, while keeping just ahead of the pursuing fleet. Admiral Creven watched his tactical display in growing alarm as reports came in from 3 different sectors simultaneously. 3 human ships had entered Dominion space, and all 3 were destroying Krell vessels with impunity. His carefully dispersed fleet was being drawn into 3 separate engagements, and he realized too late that this was exactly what the humans wanted. He ordered all forces to fall back and regroup, but the message took precious minutes to reach all his ships, and by then the trap had already been sprung. 3 human ships converged at the predetermined coordinates and found themselves facing 91 Krell warships that had pursued them from 3 different directions. The Krell vessels were scattered and disorganized from the chase, and they were positioned perfectly for what came next. Elena gave the order, and all 3 ships opened fire with fragmentation rounds. Each railgun shot struck a Krell vessel and then exploded into hundreds of supersonic fragments that tore through nearby ships. In 30 seconds, 27 Krell vessels were destroyed or crippled. The surviving Krell ships tried to return fire, but their plasma weapons splashed harmlessly against the adaptive shields. They tried to fall back and regroup, but the human ships pursued relentlessly and picked them off one by one. Admiral Crevan watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed, and he finally gave the order for all ships to retreat back to Krell. Prime, what remained of the second battle group, jumped away in disorder and left behind the wreckage of 64 warships floating dead in space. Elena opened a communication channel to all surviving Krell vessels, and when she spoke, her words were recorded and transmitted across the entire Dominion. She said that humanity had offered peace, and the Krell had chosen war. She said that every Krell fleet that crossed into human space would be destroyed, and every Krell world that supported the war effort would become a target. She said the age of Krell dominance was over, and a new era had begun. And she promised that humanity would not stop fighting until every occupied human world was liberated, and every human death was avenged. The message ended, and the 3 human ships turned toward Krell Prime itself to begin the next phase of their campaign. Asterisk.